My name is Layla Taragi. I am a program coordinator for the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies. I have the privilege of working with Shireen Khosropour, who's the director of the center, and I'm going to turn things over to her for her to introduce herself and the work of the center a little more before passing it on to our discussants today. So thanks.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Shireen Khosropour. I'm a psychology professor at ACC. I'm also director of the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies. And it's the center that brings this film series in collaboration with our film department and with Dr. Mark Cunningham as the lead, curator and lead for our film series, Cinema of Conflict and Transformation. Layla will put in the link to our website, to our center's website, so you can see all of the events that we bring to you. We have currently for the community, for students, staff, faculty, and the community, we're bringing two series. One is Peace in Relationships, and I strongly encourage you to try to join us for those. They're really useful, great presentations that will help enhance your relationships. I learn something new every time I listen, even sometimes to the same speech, to the same talk by the same person. I still learn something new. So we have, I think, 3 more of those talks coming this semester for Peace in Relationship. We also have the recording of our previous talks in that series on our website that you can listen to, watch on your own. This series, Cinema of Conflict and Transformation, is also ongoing this semester with more films coming. I believe we have 2 more films. Is that right, Mark? Yeah, yes. After this, we have 2 more films to discuss. So please check that out. And I was asked to say a little bit about my background. I am an immigrant. I came from Iran at the age of 17, sort of voluntarily, but I would say that I was displaced because of the revolution and the political stuff that was happening in Iran. And I ended up becoming kind of reluctant immigrant. And then later, I think now I count as an exile. So I came with very, very, very limited English to the US, and thanks to a community college that I attended, I was able to make it through, transferred to UT, and fell in love with Austin and an American who lived in Austin. So ended up staying here, got my PhD at UT also, and then really wanted to work at a community college. And so I was lucky that ACC hired me. That is my background in short. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mark Cunningham to introduce himself and then the rest of our speakers.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Thank you all for joining us for what I think will be a really interesting discussion about the film Dawnland. My name is Dr. Mark Cunningham. I am a professor of radio, television, and film here at ACC. I, kind of written extensively about everything from, Black film, popular culture, and just film in general. I've written articles about Spike Lee, and published articles about Spike Lee, on Black popular culture, on Ice-T's role on Law and Order Special Victims Unit. So I write extensively about film and television a bit. I am right now in the process of having a book published through Columbia University Press. I wrote a book on John Singleton, on race, gender, and narrative in John Singleton's South Central-based films, Boys in the Hood, Poetic Justice, and Baby Boy. So I'm really excited about that finally coming to fruition. And so I teach courses in Intro to Cinema. I'm teaching a course this semester on the independent filmmaker John Sayles, which I'm super excited about teaching. And I have some great students in all of my classes, actually, and also teach a class in kind of an introduction to mass communications course as well, too. So that's about it I can give you. So I'm going to turn this over to our discussants for today, my co-discussants who I'm being in conversation with, Dr. Jing Lauer, who I've known for a long time. We came up as PhD babies together at UT, and then the co-director of our film today, Mr. Adam Mazo. So I'm just so happy to have both of them here with me. So I'm going to turn it over to Jean, and they can introduce themselves to you.
Thank you so much, Shireen and Layla and Mark, for helping facilitate this film screening and discussion. It's very near and dear to my heart, the issues presented by this film. I would like to begin by acknowledging that Austin Community College is on Indigenous land and on the traditional territory of original peoples, including the Tonkawa, who lived in Central Texas, and the Comanche and Apache, who moved through this area. Today, various Indigenous peoples from all over the globe visit Austin and also call it home. We are grateful to be able to study, learn, and join all of our participants today on this piece of Turtle Island. A little bit of my background, as Mark said, I have my PhD from UT Austin. It's how I landed in Austin almost 20 years ago. I also now call this my home. I grew up in Michigan, however, granddaughter of European immigrants, and went to college at a small school, studying actually Spanish and chemistry, but then turned fully into the liberal arts for my graduate work, and I have a humanities and Spanish language and lit background with a specialization in Mexican American and Indigenous studies. Worked for 15 years now, a little over 15 years at Austin Community College in the humanities, and about 5 years now in radio, television, film at ACC. And in addition to that, as part of my film world life, I have worked for a long time with film festivals, and that's how I got to know about a lot of the issues and I guess celebrations of Indigenous cultures through work with film festivals and getting to know the stories and storytellers of all of those wonderful, amazing accomplishments, but also some of the challenges. And so with Cine Las Americas, which is based here in Austin, Texas, I've worked with Latinx and Indigenous filmmakers for a number of years to promote screenings, conversations, and the like. So that's enough about me. Welcome, Adam. I would love to have you present your acknowledgement and yourself.
Hi, Jean. Thank you, Shireen, Layla, Mark. Wonderful to see you all. Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you. I'm Adam Mazo, co-director of the film Dawnland and co-founder of Upstander Project. I'm here in the territory of the Massachusetts people and their neighbors, the Wampanoag and Nipmuc nations, in Chuapanakik, the place where the sun first looks our way, better known as the Dawnland. And more specifically, I'm in the region of Massachusetts, which I've come to understand is the place of the Blue Hills, or the place of the Great Hills. And for anyone who's ever been in this area in Boston, there's the Blue Hills Reservation that you can still go to today, and you'll have a hard time finding even just that little nugget of information that I just shared, even when you go to the Blue Hills just outside of Boston. And those names might ring a bell because the Wampanoag people, the people of the First Light, were the first people to lay eyes on those English separatists that invaded our shores 402 years ago, or 401 years ago, otherwise known as the Pilgrims, who got lost and wound up just on the other side of Massachusetts Bay from where I am in Boston. And within a few decades, the diseases and warfare that the Pilgrims brought decimated the indigenous population here by somewhere between 60 and 90%. But Massachusetts people, Wampanoag people, Nipmuc people are still here. And in Boston, there's also a very vibrant indigenous community of people who are indigenous to other places, but now have deep roots in this place. Me, myself, I'm Ashkenazi Jewish on all sides of my family. I'm descended from Latvian and Lithuanian rabbis, Jews who supported the Confederacy, and shopkeepers from West Virginia and Virginia. And my two boys, 6 and 3, are also descended from all those people, as well as survivors of the Holocaust and South African settlers. So I like to look at it as we all have complex histories, and none of us are solely perpetrator or oppressed. But today, even if my ancestors came here as immigrants and as non-white, I very much possess white privilege, and I'm a settler, and I am a white man in this time. And I think that's an important piece to acknowledge as we enter this. I'm just one person on the team that made Dawnland. There's a much more extensive team, many of whom are Native, many of whom are Wabanaki. And also, having said that, this film would have been a different film if it was led by Wabanaki people. And maybe we can get into a little later as we get into the conversation. That's kind of that road we've been on with our filmmaking. The more recent film that we've made has been more deeply in collaboration with Wabanaki people as part of the learning journey that we went on in making Dawnland. So that's my long-winded land acknowledgement. And yeah, maybe I'll stop talking and see where we want to go from here.
Great, this is awesome. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I will start by saying, just in speaking for myself, just how, ignorant I was to just the plight of Native Americans in this country after having watched this film. I knew some things, but I found out I didn't know near enough after watching this. And so thank you, Adam, and your team for that. So I want to start by asking, the ancillary guides for this film, and just by the way, y'all, there's a teaching guide for this film as well as a viewer's guide for this film, and both are very extensive. And in one of the kind of the question that kept popping up in both these guides is that it was the hope of the filmmaker that Dawnland, of the filmmakers of Dawnland rather, that audiences would find answers to this particular question of what is the relationship between the taking of the land and the taking of the children. And so I wanted to ask Jean, Adam, and Shireen, I wanted to ask you this as from the perspective of Shireen, you as the leader of and the head of the Peace and Conflict Studies Department, Adam, you as the filmmaker, and Jean, you as a professor who these issues are near and dear to you. How does that question, how would you answer that question coming from your perspective?
Maybe I should go first, since I'm not a film person. I'm thrilled to have this privilege to hear from people who know film, and not only that, people who made this film. So it's just the biggest perk of my job is learning. This is a prime example. But I wanted to say a little bit about how I saw the two themes of this film. And Adam, you can correct me. I'm happy to be corrected. But this is from just my perspective. I feel like this film had two main topics. One for me as a peace and conflict studies person was violence. What kinds of violence were committed against the people. And second is the topic of how do we make it a little bit okay? How do we repair some of that? The truth and reconciliation work that was being done. To me, those two resonate really well with our work in peace and conflict studies. In peace studies, we broadly define, first of all, we define violence as more broadly than most people think about. So, for example, bullying is violence, right? But we also talk about three different kinds of violence that are not mutually exclusive. They're overlapping. There is direct violence from specific people against specific people. And I want you to think about, I saw examples of all of these types of violence in the film. So there was definitely direct violence. And that could be killing, assault, abuse, child abuse, ridiculing, that kind of thing. And then there is structural violence, which is built into our structures, built into our laws, built into our procedures. And that definitely existed in this film. you showed it, like showed the history of that. And then there's cultural violence. That's sort of the prevailing belief systems and attitudes in the culture that legitimize structural violence and direct violence. And that's what made the structural violence, the laws, these like rules that were written possible. So sort of that's the peace studies definition of violence. But I don't think we're done with it. I mean, what it made me, like Mark, like I was ignorant about how long it went on. I was just blown away by how recent this has been. And why didn't I learn about this? You know, I'm a college educated person. Why didn't I learn about this? And, you know, to this day, still, you know, we have displaced peoples from structural violence that creates conditions where people have to leave their homes, either separate from their families or leave the home and everything else they know, to seek asylum, to become refugees. And then what do we do with people who seek asylum? Do we separate families from each other? So we're kind of doing this kind of thing globally and even in our own backyards still. And then the second topic, the truth and reconciliation, it's balancing truth-telling with justice. Bishop Tutu said that by creating these truth and reconciliation commissions, I'm going to read his quote. Where did I put it? Yes, that freedom was exchanged for truth. So the people who committed the acts of violence had a responsibility for telling the truth, and that bought their freedom. They didn't get persecuted. What I didn't see in this particular setting is truth-telling by people who committed the acts of violence. It's people who had suffered the acts of violence, who had the burden and the responsibility of telling the truth. And that's the first step, but maybe it's like even half of the first step. We need both sides to tell the truth, to own up to it, right? And then to move toward reconciliation after that, first at an individual level, and then we owe it to create structural reconciliation at the structural level too. Like, do we have we remediated the structures in society that cause that violence? So sorry, that was long-winded, but this film just really made me very passionate about these things. Thanks for making it.
Oh, Adam, about the correlation, you know, based, you know, to jump off of what Shireen just said, but this relationship between the taking of the land and the taking of the children. How would you answer that question?
Yeah, that's it's the big one. I mean, that's the compelling question of the teacher's guide. What is, as you say, what's the relationship between the taking of the children and the taking of the land? And I think Shireen is right on in terms of how you get to that question, in that, you know, that wasn't the starting point in this land that became the United States. You know, the starting point was that outright direct violence, as you say. It was, you know, it was killing Native people. It was, you know, spreading disease to kill off Native people. It was issuing scalp proclamations to put up a price on the literal scalps of Penobscot, other Wabanaki people, as we explore in our other newer film, Bounty. And so when those things became no longer politically viable, it shifted from that direct physical violence to the structural violence that Shireen is talking about, where then you shifted to boarding schools, as you get a glimpse of in the film, where you know, people like Pratt, they didn't see themselves as committing violence. They saw themselves as, you know, assimilating the savage that needed to be assimilated. And then the people like the child welfare workers from our our vantage point, reading through all the statements that they provided, some, oh gosh, what was it? About 3,000 pages worth of statements that we went through, that are, you know, all recorded. If anyone ever wants to listen to or watch them, they're all available on the archive for the TRC on the Bowdoin College website. You can watch, you can listen, the transcripts are there. We went through all of them. And we sat in on many of the statements that were given. And then we what those that we didn't sit down on, we read. And even the folks in the child welfare system who, I think you could rightly say, perpetrated extreme violence towards families by separating them unnecessarily, they also didn't see themselves as perpetrating violence. They saw themselves as doing, you know, doing good, trying to take care, looking after families. So they were telling their truth. It just so happened that their truth was that they were doing the best that they could, and given the state of the system. You know, as you hear one of the former leaders of that system saying, you know, two shoes on the feet are better than an Indian dance. There's your cultural genocide right there. There's your erasure of the culture and the just as an aside, that there's no relevance or significance to the culture. And so essentially, you know, the policymakers realized that, as you hear it said in different ways in the movie, and you know, no more Indians, no more Indian land. Mm-hmm. And so if you take the children away from the Indians, as the policymakers looked at it, then no more tribes. And if there's no more tribes, there's nobody to make a claim to the land. And if there's nobody to make a claim to the land, then all we need to do is just acknowledge the land and who was on it, instead of wrestling with who is here and the indigenous people that are still asking for the land to be returned to their stewardship. And the folks that might say, oh my gosh, but they're going to kick us off the land. No, that's not what indigenous people are going to. Indigenous people are not. They're not like settlers like me. They're not going to kick people off the land. They just want to take care of the land so the land can take care of us. They're not asking for the land back because they're then going to start charging rent. That's the colonizer way. That's not the way that I've learned of many indigenous communities and cultures in this country. So thank you, Jean, thank you, Shireen, for that framing of it.
Okay, Jean?
I'll just say a couple of things, which is that, you know, the process historically, and to this day, right, is about erasure and silencing. It's about naturalizing, right, the current systems of land ownership and government, and also relationships, right, between people. One of the reasons that I you know, feel strongly about sharing films like this and talking about them is really to step back and take a moment to deconstruct, right, those very things, right, capitalism and religious ideologies that really undergird the formation of this country and the establishment of territories, right? And also back to erasure, negate the current lived experience of many people in our country. In this case, right, we're talking about American Indian experience. And the fact that, right, that there is leadership, community, structure, land still, right, alive today, stewarded, and in conversation with the US federal government, I think has to be foregrounded consistently, continually, always, till everyone knows about it, and until more of these conversations, very difficult conversations, can happen, and I hope lead to more reconciliation. I too, many years ago, about a decade ago, was floored by these same issues, because my background was in Latin American indigenous studies, as opposed to, you know, north of the Rio Grande, where it was like Mexican American studies. And I was like, wait a second, these issues cross borders, and also the US is not acknowledging indigenous, right, American Indian experience, etc. And I learned about it in Canada. I didn't learn about it here. I went to Imagine Native, which is a amazing festival in Toronto that has global indigenous films and filmmakers by and about. And I was just like, I set up school for myself at the festival. Like, I need to learn all that I can. And so, you know, the images you see in the film with Justin Trudeau and some of the efforts that have been made in Canada have been important. They're not enough, but I think they point the way. And I would like to just ask really quickly, Adam, you know, are some of these issues, Maine is surrounded by Canada, like, is that part of why this first TRC is in Maine? Is that part of the history, or is that not related at all?
It's a good question. I think the biggest reason is that there was just this group of brilliant and determined women, and I say women because they were all women who were leading the way in creating this effort. And they did actually go to Canada and observe a little bit of Sandy Whitehock, one of the commissioners, was I think the term was honorary witness or something along those lines at the Canadian TRC as they were in formation. I think it's, you know, maybe, as my ancestors would say, but maybe it was Beshert meant to be, even though it maybe didn't necessarily. But maybe there's some of that, you know, knowledge being passed back and forth, because Wabanaki people span from, I see my connection's unstable. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. Wabanaki people span from, you know, the Dawnland spans from what we now refer to today as, you know, southeastern New England, Connecticut, Rhode Island, all the way up into Nova Scotia, Newfoundland. So Wabanaki people have been here, you know, just as indigenous people in your region have been there on both sides of the so-called border between the United States and Mexico. Same goes for up this way between the United States and Canada.
Okay. Well, you guys have kind of already touched on a lot of the questions I was going to ask. So, I'll just hopefully these aren't redundant in some ways now. But I did want to kind of extend on a point that Shireen had made earlier about, in the way she framed this and talking about the types of violence, but certainly the part about the truth and reconciliation. Why, Adam, do you think, and Jean as well, why do you think there's such reticence on the part of some Americans, particularly those in positions of authority and power, to own up to the many myriad wrongs that have been inflicted upon Native American or indigenous people in America? Why do you think there's such reticence to do that?
Jean?
It's hard to admit these things. I mean, I think part of it is that we are in a space where many of us are enough removed, right? That we can, that especially within white privilege and power, we can just say, well, it's happened, right? Like, we're just going to keep going. What can we do about it, right? And you know, Adam, your film says, well, no, it's still going on and we still need to do something about it, right? So let's flip that script. I think the comfort and discomfort, right, has to be addressed. And the point of view of the film of indigenizing the process, I think is really the answer, but it's also the hardest part for people to hear and really commit to, right? It means giving up some of your power. It means admitting that things are messed up, even if, right, like, however you want to frame that, like, even if I didn't cause it, right, I need to admit it's messed up, and I need to figure out what I own and what I don't own. And so does the person next to me, and so does the person next to me. right? That's Adam.
Yeah.
I'll toss it to you.
Because I was gonna say, there's an extension in the film. We hear the social worker apologize for other social workers, right? But not, you know, and what was done in that regard in terms of not, you know, social workers not listening to these women, these indigenous people kind of talk about like, hey, we're being, you know, we're being cruelly mistreated here, and you know, we're not being served in the way that we're supposed to be served. But you know, I think about you know, Shireen talking about that missing component, right? This kind of owning up to it, and thinking about, you know, why did that? Why is the social worker apologizing for the lack of work social workers, you know, of the work social workers didn't do at the time? But then there is not this, you know, apology or onus placed on this kind of cultural genocide that ends up happening.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you know, one of the things that we heard about in the report that they issued, that where they said that cultural genocide is happening in Maine, you know, I think they couched it. They didn't want to say genocide because they thought it would be too sort of scary for people. So they couched it and said cultural genocide, even though I think they felt in their hearts and looking at the evidence and looking at the definition of genocide that that's what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And to your question, that I don't know who to attribute this to, but if somebody knows, please do, because it's not my saying. But you know, when I'm accustomed to privilege, then sometimes equality can feel like oppression. And I think that's some of what's going on for folks in power. And I think there's also this deep, you know, this fear that if we give up power, that those who are oppressed are going to do to us what we did to them, or what our ancestors did to them,
Mm-hmm.
or that they're going to do even worse. They're going to do the things that we can't even mention or won't even face that we might do to them or might have done to them. Instead of just understanding that we're all humans and we, I think, want to get along, want to actually live in community and in a good way with people. There's a brilliant kind of example of that in the 1970s when the Indian Child Welfare Act got passed in 1978, and around that time there was a lot of advocacy in Maine by the Wabanaki folks saying, "Hey, you know what? The treaties actually say that we have a rightful claim to 2/3 of the state of Maine." And there was great fear mongering and some might say gaslighting that was perpetrated by a lot of the establishment in Maine, where they said, "Oh my gosh, we're going to lose the state of Maine. 2/3 of the state of Maine is going to go to the Wabanaki, and they're going to kick us out of our homes, and they're going to kick us off of our land." When Wabanaki people were not saying that. They were not saying they wanted to take the land away and kick them off the land, but the fear mongering was to such an extent that banks stopped loaning money in some cases. There was an effect on property values because there was fear that Wabanaki people were going to seize all the land. And they ended up, you know, having a settlement, which is being relitigated right now today. There was literally a hearing yesterday at the State House in Maine where Wabanaki people are trying to renegotiate the settlement because they say the state has not been upholding their end of the bargain. The state of Maine treats them like towns, municipalities, instead of as sovereign nations. Whereas every other federally recognized tribe in the country is treated as a sovereign nation. And in Maine, it's different. And it's because of that settlement that came about. And so they really effectively use that fear mongering to scare people into turning public sentiment against Wabanaki people even more than it already was. And at that same time, there were, you know, lots of mascots and people cheering on, you know, the teams named Indian and Redskin, et cetera, and waving scalp towels. These are white folks doing this. And not noting the irony and also the violence that causes towards Native people, that, you know, that some of that stuff persists today. So I think there's really recent examples of this that we can look at. And there's a really great podcast that goes into that little story that I told about the 70s and 80s. I'll see if I can find the name of it and share it in the chat for folks that might want to dig into it a little more.
Wow. Well, speaking of the Wabanaki tribe, can you speak a little more to the history of that tribe and how they, in other tribes that inhabit that space. I was really interested in seeing, you will do the diagram in the film where you show along the all of the tribes in that space. I mean, yeah, no, I had no idea.
Yeah, and I should have said up front, I didn't either. I often say, and I think I forgot to say tonight, I grew up in the territory of the Anishinaabe people, in the land of sky tinted water, Minnesota, in the Twin Cities. And I went to high school in the territory of the Calusa people in Sarasota, Florida, at a public high school there. And then I went to community college just north of there. And then I went to University of Florida. Shout out to my community college, was called Manatee Community College. They changed the name after, and I don't actually remember what it's called. I think it's called the State College of Florida or something like that. Shout out to community college, everybody in the room. And then I went to University of Florida and got a bachelor's in journalism. I'm remembering, Shireen, that you asked me to share a little bit about this. So I do not have a PhD or anything like that, but all that's to say, I didn't know any, just virtually everything I've told you tonight, I didn't know 9 years ago when I started on this journey. And I'm no expert. I'm just trying to share what I've learned along the way. And what I've learned about Wabanaki folks. So I mentioned Chuapanakik, the place where the sun first looks our way, and Wabanaki are the people of the place where the sun first looks our way, or the people of the Dawnland. And they formed a confederacy of many nations in the 1700s to try to combat colonialism. And there were some 20 tribes at that time, and now there are at least 5 that we know of that exist today. The Passamaquoddy. I can't quite say properly these are all anglicized names. It was something more like Passamaquoddy is the actual name. The Passamaquoddy, the people who spear pollock. The Penobscot, the people of the Bunnawapskeg, the people of the people where the rocks spread out in the river. The Maliseet and the Mi'kmaq, and all of them except for the Penobscot span across the border from Maine into New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and all these people have been here since time immemorial, 13,000 years or more. They were some of the first to face scalp proclamations. They were some of the first to encounter Europeans, even long before the pilgrims that I mentioned. Vikings encountered Wabanaki people in the, somebody will correct me on my dates, 1200s, 1300s, I don't remember exactly, sorry. And Wabanaki people have been on these lands, and they were not nomads. They were not wanderers. They had places where they went in the summer and places where they went in the winter. And they would do a lot of hunting and fishing in the closer to the coast in the summertime, and then move more inland in the wintertime. And they are leaders. They are people who hold the history of this land. And there's so much more that I'm leaving out that my Wabanaki colleagues could add a lot more richness, but that's a little bit about what I can share. And there are more than 10,000 Wabanaki folks here today. And that's just in Maine. There are, I think, 50 or 60,000 more in Canada. And then there are many other tribes in New England, where I am, Massachusetts, Nipmuc, Wampanoag, many thousands of others who also are in the Dawnland. I mentioned the tribal names earlier. Most of them allude to or refer to the Dawn or the Dawnland. Yeah.
Cool. Jean, do you have anything to add to that, or anything you want to add to that?
No, but I am curious myself, especially given where Adam just left off with, I believe it was Brandon, who, thank you for asking a question. Like, then, okay, so you didn't know about this. How did you come to this project? Why this 8-9 years ago?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Brandon. Hi. Hi. Thanks for the question, Brandon. Yeah. So we made a film called Coexist that I wouldn't make today, because I don't think I necessarily was the best person to make that film. But we made it about forced reconciliation in Rwanda after the genocide there. And it was primarily for a US audience. And we did work with Rwandan collaborators. And we that was the beginning of Upstander Project, the organization that I co-founded with Dr. Mishi Lesser, who's the author of the Teacher's Guides that you should all check out, because there's so much more there that you can learn if you're interested in this. There's a lot, and it's really wonderful. And we would do these workshops, and we were doing a lot of teacher trainings around Coexist, and we would talk about genocide and the different definitions of genocide. And Mishi would often say, we're teaching about genocide in a faraway place in Rwanda in East Africa, and we want to acknowledge genocide in this country's history. And me at that time, that made me uncomfortable, because I was like, ooh, really? Did genocide happen here? Is that, I'm not so sure about that. Is that accurate? Clearly now you can tell I feel differently, having looked at the evidence for many, many years. But I think she especially, and me too, we became uncomfortable that we were teaching about this. We were two Ashkenazi Jewish white folks teaching about Rwanda and genocide, and not looking at our own country's history and how we came to be here and colonialism in this place. It was as these conversations were happening that we heard about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission forming. The commissioners had just been sworn in, and Mishi just sent me one of those emails that you get from a friend or a colleague saying, hey, check out this NPR story. And I listened to it, and I was kind of off to the races. It was really, Mark, I felt exactly like you. How did I not know about this? How did I not know Wabanaki people were here? I didn't grow up in this region, but even still, I lived in this region at that point for close to 10 years and knew really nothing about the indigenous people or history of this region or the contemporary realities. And I just got in touch with one of the folks that was helping to coordinate the commission and said, hey, I don't know if we're the right folks for this, but we're filmmakers. We're not far from you. We made this other film. We are working, we want to teach folks like you about these things and make a teacher's guide to go along with the film, and let us know if you'd be interested. And after 6 months of back and forth and some visits, 4 or 5 hour drives back and forth to Ellsworth, Maine, and other places, they said, yeah, we want you to film. And I truly, to this day, I know that none of us really knew what we were getting into, not just me and our team, but also the folks that invited us in. Because I think, of course, the process that they were embarked on was transformative, but also I think certainly transformed everybody involved, myself included. I try as best I can to take the irony of this after giving a long answer, but I'm going to say it anyways. I try to take to heart what I first heard from Kisa Tanamuk, one of the commissioners that you met in the film, who said, why Creator gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? So, to listen twice as much as we talk. So,
yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, your access is incredible. I was, that's one of the first things that stood out to me, especially as you described now, you were an outsider to it, and that's amazing how welcomed it seemed that you were, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you were very welcomed once you got to know people. I have one quick follow-up, Mark, if that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah. I was curious, and I may have missed it, but did you interview and not include or not interview any of the families that took children in? There's, the social work perspective and the many of the children, now adults, and their children affected by this process. But I was curious about that, about the families.
Yeah, and to your point about being outsiders, yeah, we certainly are and were outsiders and made all sorts of mistakes and had challenges with access all the time. But we're able to make some good relationships with a lot of folks. So many folks who are incredibly generous with us in so many ways, even when we were not, or even when we were relying on outdated colonial ideas of ethics in filmmaking and journalistic so-called objectivity, which I no longer really subscribe to. I think objectivity is kind of a colonizer's privilege. I don't think it's really a real thing. I think it's sort of innately humanly impossible to be objective. however hard we might try. We are people of our upbringings and perspectives, and it's hard to turn away from that. But as far as the families who fostered children, we really tried to contain our scope to what is the TRC doing and who are they talking to, and there was very little. There was maybe a very small handful of people who they interviewed who were foster families, and for the most part, the nature of their statement gathering, it was really statement gathering. It wasn't interviewing. It certainly wasn't interrogation by any means. So they had sort of a set list of questions, and they didn't really follow up on it really much of anything. So they didn't press anybody on anything. And so I would say there wasn't a whole lot revealed by folks who were involved in fostering. There were some, Native folks who were involved in fostering, and I think it's a different scenario. But the non-Native folks that were involved in fostering, just not a lot was revealed there, I think. And I think Mark or Gina, I think maybe you both alluded to it earlier, the idea of reconciliation, and Shalene, you also talked about the idea of people, perpetrators acknowledging the truth. And through the process, you get a sense of, we certainly witnessed the TRC itself, and certainly the Wabanaki folks in Wabanaki Reach, they shifted from a mindset of reconciliation. They really shifted their definition of reconciliation. I think particularly a lot of white folks, but maybe even beyond that, we think of it as, the people that did harm are going to apologize, and then we're all going to get along and things will be better. And they shifted from something along those lines to more of an idea of people who are not Wabanaki need to reconcile themselves with the truth of what happened, and need to understand what happened, because the history has been so erased, to the point that even people like myself living in Boston can be completely ignorant to the existence of Native people in this region today, much less the violence perpetrated upon them. They sort of said, we're going to combat erasure by getting people to accept the truth, and that this sort of colonizer urge to, like, as Esther says, why can't we just hug and get along? Sure, that's a great aspiration, but that wasn't what they were looking for. They wanted people to know the truth, and once they know the truth, then think about where they're going to go from there.
Oh, cool. So just to kind of, Patricia asked a question here about the mental health of the children who suffered into their adulthood, which is connected to a question I wanted to pose about Georgina, the elder Georgina that's shown in the story, kind of recounting her childhood years and how painful that was for her. Talking about the fact that it was one of probably the singular instances where anybody had even asked her, what her childhood was like, and not just for Georgina, but for many of those people shown in the film. Would you, in connection to Patricia's question too, would you speak to the damage that this kind of forced assimilation did to the Native American people in this area, and just people who were affected by these type of civilized, or this civilizing, if you will?
Yeah. Esther Ann, who you met in the film, one of the, she doesn't like this, but others have said it too, and I think one of the godmothers of the TRC, along with many other brilliant women. She talks about that this is what it looks like to survive a genocide. I think there's a lot of blame. Why can't insert name of oppressed group of people? Why can't they do this? Why can't they do that? Why can't they, why are they so addicted to this, or why are they having problems with that? This is what it looks like to survive genocide, an ongoing genocide. It has a deep effect. And we talk about very briefly in Bounty, the science behind intergenerational trauma, and the reality that Dawn Neptune Adams, who you meet briefly in Dawnland, talking about her foster parent washing her mouth out with soap for speaking Penobscot. she's been on an incredible journey, a really, I think she would say, healing journey, in part through Dawnland, not just because of that, but she's been, presenting and sharing the film and then making Bounty with us and appearing in Bounty. And she talks about the memory of being hunted is in our blood. And what does that do to a person? What does that do? And when the structural violence continues to this day, and Patricia, more to the point of your question, thank you. The Reach, the organization that created the TRC, was very much, of course, incredibly concerned, as they should be, with how to help people through the process, and trying to offer support through the process. And a lot of their work now, I think, is ongoing, is trying to support that. And there's been some good build out in Wabanaki communities of mental health services and just a greater awareness of Wabanaki people and Wabanaki issues over the last 8 years or so, where there's, I hope, more philanthropic support, more government support, that sort of thing. And I think they also, it would have been good to do more during the process, because the process of giving statements, so many people in the statements talked about having never talked about this, that they thought it was their own personal tragedy. And for some people it was medicine, and for some people it was tearing open a scab, and really painful, and sent people, some people spiraling downward. That's the reality of it too. And a lot of people talked about, you can hear that in the statements, a lot of people talking about not knowing what happened to their child, or not knowing what happened to their parent, or not knowing that they were Native, finding out as adults later in life. And it's, I mean, Shireen, you can probably speak more to this, you're much more an expert on this on me, but not knowing who you are and what that does to a person. I've witnessed the effects, but I can't get into the psychological trauma that is, and how that endures, and what effect that has on people, and the communal trauma that's held by the community.
Yeah. It very much reminds me of the slave trade, in the same way that, Black people in this culture say the same thing, like, we really don't know where we come from, actually, and not trying to, put these two, these marginalized groups into this kind of pissing contest of who suffered the worst. Because I think that ends up happening sometimes as well, too. But we're not getting the attention. No, but we should get the attention, but when in fact everybody should be in this situation where all of these things get, again, to go back to Shireen's initial statement about truth and reconciliation, and how so much of that reconciliation is not happening, and these things are not being addressed, for sure, which brings me to the Indian Child Welfare Act. Please talk about that, Jean, Adam, about how important that is, and how, unfortunately, it's no more.
Jean, I don't know is that an area of expertise for you?
No, I mean, I will gladly defer to you on this, and chime in if there's anything that I would like to add. I mostly would love to hear you.
Sure. And Mark, I don't want to let it go by also, your comment about the slave trade, and there's another piece to this that, it's not in the movie, but I think, and we weren't going to get into this in the movie, but there's the anti-Blackness that certainly exists, obviously deeply across cultures everywhere. But Esther even talks about the anti-Blackness that exists in Wabanaki communities. As you see in the film, Wabanaki folks largely, not entirely, but largely have pretty pale, relatively pale skin. That's not universal, but that tends to be the case. And I don't think Wabanaki folks would mind me saying that. And then if you go into Southern New England and Pequot folks, Narragansett, Shinnecock, you'll find a lot of folks that you might say, oh, that they look like they're Black, or they're mixed, or whatever. And yeah, they're Native, they're Black, they're all of those things. But Esther's talked about the anti-Blackness that exists, and the white passing privilege that exists in Native communities. And it also reminded me of the way that, the slave trade impacted Native people as well. Native people as slave owners, I think more closer to your geography than ours, but also Native people enslaved and brought to Bermuda. We had the opportunity to show not just Bermuda, but that's a place that I know about because we had the opportunity to show the film there. And there are Wabanaki people there. They maybe don't know that they're Wabanaki. That history has been erased, but Pequot people and Narragansett people were taken there by I think it's the English after the Pequot War and enslaved, and then later came to think of themselves as Mohawk because that's what the white folks called them. But then I think just in the last 10, 20 years, there's been more of a cultural exchange among Pequot people and Narragansett people going to Bermuda, and native folks in Bermuda, folks who are native to this region where I am, then seeing some of the dances and saying, hey, that's what we do. Those are the same as our dances. And they realize making those connections. So I know it's a little bit of a tangent, but because you mentioned, I wanted to mention, should I get into the Indian Child Welfare Act now?
Yeah, please go ahead. Yes.
So the Indian Child Welfare Act remains the law of the land, but it's very much in jeopardy. It's I think on the track to being appealed to the Supreme Court. And it's been in jeopardy for the last several years. But that was the law I mentioned that passed in 1978, and the Truth Commission looked at the period since the Indian Child Welfare Act passed, ICWA for short. Since ICWA was passed up until 2012, when the commission was formed, they wanted to see how had Maine been doing in following the Indian Child Welfare Act. And one of the biggest things that they found is that about half the time, child welfare workers were not asking the question of whether or not a child was native. And so you get back into this paper genocide. What happens is, and that's part of the reason I wanted to talk about the anti-Blackness and the skin and the reality of melanin and lack of melanin, is that child welfare workers would look at a child and say, this child is white. I don't need to ask this child if they're native. And so a lot of times they wouldn't be asked, or they wouldn't ask, that whatever adult was in their life, whether or not the child was native. And when you don't ask, especially if you're dealing with a young child or even parents who are terrified of the system, they're not necessarily going to volunteer anything, even if they know who they are. And so the statistics that we have in many cases may be really undercounted, how many native children are actually going into foster care, even today, because people are not necessarily asking the questions that they need to ask. And the law has certainly helped. It's definitely imperfect. Native folks will tell you, but it's also done tremendous good for folks who are part of federally recognized tribes. I say that because one of our producers, Bruce Dutu, he's a member of a state recognized tribe, and ICWA does not afford any protection to state recognized tribes. So people who are members of state recognized tribes, I think there's quite a few. I don't know if there are any in Texas, but there are definitely some in the Southeast. There's quite a few across the country. The law doesn't apply to them, and so they can still be in this morass of child welfare systems with no protection from that law. And the reality, there's a really brilliant podcast called This Land, and season 1 was about the landmark case, McGirt case in Oklahoma that was recently decided, I think last year, that rightly gave control of much of eastern Oklahoma back to the so-called civilized tribes, the Cherokee, Chickasaw, and others. And the season 2 focuses on the Indian Child Welfare Act. So folks who want to get into it, it's really interesting, really moving. Sandy Whitehock is featured a little bit, who you met in Dawnland, and they talk a lot about what the attack on the Indian Child Welfare Act is really about. And it's not. It's funded by the Goldwater Institute, and it's really about corporate and capitalist power. It's about destroying sovereignty of tribes for money, so that tribes no longer have, a sort of monopoly on gambling, so that tribes no longer have a say in blocking, extractive industries from mining their land. It's really they really don't care about Native children. They don't care about how child welfare is being implemented. They just care about dismantling sovereignty, because they're trying to say that ICWA is a race-based law and therefore it's unconstitutional, which if they were correct, that would be true. But what's important to understand is, though, we are all racialized people, and Native people have been racialized perhaps, as much as anybody. And the reality is they are sovereign citizens of nations. It's a political designation. The law is not about race. The law is about whether or not you're a member of a tribe, and the tribes get to define who is a member. But they're trying to take it down in a way that they know they know that that's not what the purpose of the law is, and they know that if they can take it down in this way, that they can take down sovereignty as a whole, which would be devastating for Native people, and frankly, I think devastating for the country, because there would be so much would be lost in terms of the tremendous advocacy that Native people are doing for the land and for the earth, and that benefits us all, whether we agree with them or not.
So Shireen, once again, moves us further away from that reconciliation part. The truth and reconciliation part moves us further away from that when that happens. Wow. So women strike, and you all touched on this earlier. But again, I just want to talk about how women strike such a powerful force in this film. The women, the brave, the kind of braveness of these women to kind of get on, in this film and tell their stories in this way, as painful as these stories are. How does gender play a role into the telling of these stories? I saw very few men in the film giving these testimonies, these women, standing, coming forth and standing tall, and as painful again as these stories are, and finally having the chance to talk about what their lives has been like. Well, how do you speak to that, Adam, Jean, about that?
Jean, you want to share anything?
All you, go for it.
And Mark, you reminded me, bringing up this question about gender earlier when you were talking about the power question. I think this relates as well. I think we can't look. I think if we're going to look at why is it hard for people in power to share power or cede power, whatever, however you want to look at it, I think we have to look at masculinity too, and this notion of being strong. Boys don't cry. Suck it up and deal with it. Move on. It's over. I think all of that, it's the same narrative that we hear about this history. Oh, it's in the past, forget about it. I think all those notions teach us something about what the culture wants us to be as men. And I think it matters in how we relate to each other, how policy gets formed. This whole, sort of macho tough guy cowboy mentality that I think it matters in how we in what happens in our society. And I think it also very much relates to the question you just asked, which is why I wanted to bring it up. That I think I don't know if it's more or less than in other communities, but we heard over and over again from Native folks, that the men the men feel like they need to be strong and silent and not share their emotions, and it's not something that and that's something that a lot of folks said that's not in our culture. Speaking about Wabanaki folks, that's something from the dominant culture that men have absorbed, and that's not the way that we were historically as Wabanaki people. We weren't hiding our emotions. We were sharing them, but men have absorbed that from the dominant culture, and I think that's very much evident in who came forward. The reason that you don't see a lot of men in the movie is because there weren't a lot of men sharing their statements. There just weren't. The vast majority of people who shared were women, and I think for all the reasons that I just stated, I think is what we saw, and we felt like, of course, we wanted to try to be representative of who came forward, and so that's why you don't see very many men. You see a few here and there. Where we could find ways to incorporate them, but for the most part, they were not the ones coming forward to share statements. And yeah.
And I also want to make clear too that I recognize that I assigned words like brave and strong to women, and that's such a burden that we place on women using those words. But I couldn't think of anything else to describe how much it must have taken for Georgina and so many of the others to kind of get up and again to relay these events from their past, these very painful events. But I just want to make that clear that, you know, the burden that we put on women when we use those adjectives to describe them, because it puts them in this place, right, where, again, where the expectation is that they're like that always, or can't be anything else but. So I just wanted to acknowledge that I did that for sure. So Eva asked the question here about, you know, it's saying that as someone who's had a lot of my culture erased and assimilated due to colonization, saying that she knows how confusing and daunting it is to take the steps to reconnect. So in reference to the film and in reference to the Wabanaki tribe or any of the other tribes that you worked with, have you seen any efforts to reach out from within the communities that had their children separated?
Absolutely. And Ava, thank you, Ava. And I don't want to forget to mention, sorry, Mark, that you know, I'm not innocent here. I'm a parent of 2 little boys, 6 and 3, and how reflexive it is for me to say to them, don't cry, it's going to be okay, instead of saying it's okay to cry, it's okay to feel what you're feeling. Mm-hmm. I don't have little girls. I don't know if it would be different if I did, but it's so ingrained in me. And I think, you know, I'm sure that's part of my upbringing, but it's also part of the culture. And I have to really remind myself to not do that, especially because I have boys and I want them to be able to be people who can share their emotions with the world and not think that the way to be a man is to not betray any emotions. So, and Ava, thank you for this question. So I'm going to mention Sandy Whitehock again, because she's been doing really wonderful work through her First Nations Repatriation Institute. And you can actually, if you're interested in this, you can check out a film called Blood Memory, where Sandy's featured more prominently and gets into more the ways that she's trying to help people reconnect with their culture, reconnecting with tribes that they were disconnected from. It's, you know, and there are tribes that do it, and there are many, you know, 500, I can't remember the exact number we're at now, 540, 550 plus federally recognized tribes, and a couple hundred more in this country. And they all have different ways of going about it, different methods. And there are definitely a lot of different efforts to do it. And there's also a big effort to try to help people who return feel comfortable doing that, and also help people who are in the community understand how difficult it is to return and how to be welcoming, because that's a struggle too. Sometimes people feel you know, some negative ways about people coming back, because sometimes there are people who are outsiders, who are not part of the community, but many times there are people who were disconnected, who are very much were a part of the community, but never able to connect, or never knew where they were from, like, you know, like Georgina, who was able to reconnect to some extent with her community and regain some of that connection. But at the same time, it was different. You know, she didn't live her childhood there, and there was so much that she didn't know, and she was always you know, always a bit of an outsider, even if she was a member of her tribe and trying to reconnect. And if you want to, and by the way, if you want to watch more of her story, we made another short film called Dear Georgina, about Georgina's story, which is it's free on the Upcenter Project website, and it's only it's 15 minutes, and it's a really lovely film. Georgina got to be there for the premiere of that film at the Camden International Film Festival in Maine, just down the road from where she grew up, and she got to be on stage, and she got to be the center of attention in a way that she never ever was. A little girl who was told over and over again that if you're brown, you're no good, and to just to try to wash the brown off of herself. And it was beautiful seeing her get to do that. She passed away about a year after that. And as we say in my tradition, may her memory be a blessing to all who loved her, including me. She was a dear woman, and just a beautiful person who went through so much. And I hope you'll check out her story if you get the chance, and maybe share it with the elders in your life.
Okay, so now I'm like, you almost made me tear up right here, man, in front of everybody.
That's good.
I did not know. I didn't know that because she made such an impression on me in watching the film. So I'm really, really sad to hear that. I hope that after being able to tell her story and her the last days that she had, that she's found some peace about all of this and was able to come to some type of to be okay with how things are. I hope that. I wish that for her. I really do.
I think she did, and she even in the hospital when she was declining, she and her son were pulling up her movie on their computer to show people who she is and her story, and they were getting the nurses to watch. She would call it my movie, getting people to watch Dear Georgina. It was really special. And thank you, Layla. I see the link there.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. I want to go back to at the top of the discussion here, Jen's question about the shoe versus dance comment, striking a chord with her, and she said it's so interesting to think about the research that has come out about the benefits of grounding on the earth. So, are the shoes actually better? Are they really better? You speak to that, Adam? That question.
Jean, any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think if we get to the core of a lot of this, it's really about recognizing that there's many ways to be on this earth, right? And to connect with that earth. And no, shoes aren't better, but but they work for certain purposes, or they're not better in all circumstances, right? But they work for certain purposes. And if we only adopt one purpose for each thing, we're missing out on the richness of life, right? But that's, back to some of the points that have been percolating, here. What is the purpose of all of this? It's to recognize ourselves in each other, right? To recognize that trauma can be, while it can be a universal experience, there are certain people who have not felt heard, right? Who've been in experiences where oppressors have not ever given them the space to say, that was wrong and this happened to me, right? And to be in a space where other people say you're right? So there's kind of two sides. One side is we're all in this together. We need to hear each other for the very basic things, right? But we also really, 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 really need to hear each other when we've done each other wrong, or when the systems that we benefit from, right? And I will say this as a total white girl, the systems that I benefit from have really caused harm to a lot of people. And I need to hear their stories. And I hope that by hearing them, we can all find that peace and some reconciliation and do it differently in the future. Deconstruct what we need to deconstruct. But yeah, there's not just one way to go, not just one way to be on this earth. So that's where I am with this right now. So thanks to films like this. So thank you, Adam, and to your team, and to every single person who shared their story, whether it's in the film or not. It's incredible.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you, Jen, because I mean this conversation crystallized things for me in a way that I hadn't thought about before. That comment, it's really kind of saying, money is more important than culture, right? And just thinking about, if I had to choose between, my Jewish culture and my community and those traditions that I share with my children and that my ancestors share with their children versus, having shoes, I'd go barefoot. I would like to believe I would go barefoot. I don't know if I was really forced to make the decision. It's an impossible choice, but there's so much. Yeah, there's so much there, and I'm noticing. I know I don't know you all, but I see lots of Latinx names, and I know about the erasure that exists of indigeneity among so many Latinx communities as well, and how that I think Ava, you alluded to that a little bit too. And there's so much of that piece of identity that, we hope in our work we can help folks connect with that to the extent that they want to. I'm remembering when this film came out, we were in the midst of the sort of, I think what we were calling it, the crisis at the border, but basically, the kidnapping of, many of your relatives, Latinx and indigenous relatives, in these concentration camps on the so-called border. And at the time, there were a couple of stories going around of, these guards saying, oh, well, these people don't speak Spanish, so, we don't know what to do with them. They didn't speak Spanish because they were indigenous. Yeah. And nobody in the US government bothered to figure it out, or bothered to say, hey, maybe we, can we get somebody who speaks Quechua, or somebody who speaks Mayan, or, the other languages. And so I want to mention that, especially because of where you all are, and I'm, I wish I could know you better, but I hope I'm not overstepping. I hope that resonates with folks in the room too.
And it just, just in hearing about all of this, it makes me think about just how easy it is to be good to other people. And there's so much in this history where we just haven't been, or people haven't been good to other people. And it's just, it seems seemingly the easiest thing, right? And it just doesn't happen. Adam, what can we do, to learn more about the space we inhabit? And its connection to Native American people. I mean, like for example, you and Jean at the very beginning kind of talked about what space we were on. Like, how do people learn more about that information?
Yeah, we have a ton of resources on the Upstander Project website to that end. upstanderproject.org/land. We have a land acknowledgement there, and then from there we have sort of intentionally built a rabbit hole of links that you can go down. There are so many lists there that you can link. You'll follow some of the links and you'll find lists to movies, books, podcasts, everything you could imagine. And I love this notion that I was listening to a Code Switch episode about the so-called racial reckoning that we had last year, and talking about how white folks today are actually less likely to support Black Lives Matter than we were shortly after George Floyd was executed. And I say that because they talked about making sure that the awakening doesn't go from the library to the couch to the theater and just like that. Because if we walk, as Keith Tanamuk taught me and teaches us, for people, Mark, like you and me, who didn't know, or like, oh my God, he would say, well, now you know. And what are you going to do about it? Mm-hmm. Now you know. So, I mean, some practical examples of, please check out that link. Thank you, Layla, for putting in the chat. Maybe we would love for you to share these films with, email your high school social studies teacher. They would be thrilled to hear from you, I promise. And say, hey, you should show these films to I wish that I learned this in high school. I wish that I learned this in middle school. Why don't you show these films?
You're so right about that, Adam. I taught public school for 18 years, so you're absolutely right. They would love to hear from you.
That would be, thank you, Mark. And check out a piece of the teacher's guide, or check out the other films that we do. And like I said, all those lists that we link to. And I also want to put a little plug in for Missing in Brooks County. I don't know if anybody's seen that film, but it's a relatively new film. I think you can get it for free on PBS, maybe just for a couple more weeks. A film made just down the road from you all in Brooks County, Texas, about I was going to say it's an epidemic, but it's I can't find the right words for it, but just about the way that policy is disappearing people who are trying to find a better life. And
I'm an expert in.
Oh,
we shared that film really
wonderful.
quickly.
Thank you.
In Texas, there are projects to unearth and identify bones of people who have died throughout our state. Many places in Texas spearhead this, but Texas State is a huge one, and it profiles some of the human rights organization and also some of the people who live along the border and the issues involved with the missing and unidentified migrants.
Mm. And Mark,
it's incredible. Thanks for the shout out.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Given where you all are, hey, Mark, is it okay if I talk about Jen's question there?
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to actually, yeah, go ahead. You can, since you.
Thank you, Jen. Yes, I'm concerned that the whole, critical race theory distraction is going to cause. There's probably already bans that apply to our film that I'm not even aware of. I would please ban our film, because when things get banned, people get up, people get off the couch and act. And if somebody wants to ban our film, great, because that means more people are going to watch it. And of course, I don't really want things to be banned, and don't want things to be shut down. But the little story I can tell is this is not to toot my own horn in any way, but it's to demonstrate the environment that we're in across the country. I mentioned I went to high school in Sarasota, Florida. I was invited to be inducted into the Hall of Fame of my high school, which it feels really cool. I feel honored. And the point is, I said, oh yeah, I'd love to show Dawnland and, do some kind of workshop for teachers or something like that. And they said, oh, so we'd love you to come at such and such a time. And we're concerned with the fuss over critical race theory, that maybe we shouldn't show the film. And I pushed back a little bit, tried to politely push back. And long story short, they basically said, you can come, but you're not showing the film if you want to come. And so I'm still wrestling a little bit with what it's going to look like and how to address it. But this is my own alma mater, who wants to get some shine from my achievements, but does not want to actually have their students witness the content of those achievements.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wow.
I guess, yeah.
Man, definitely. Wow, man, that this CRT thing has gotten just kind of snowballed into something that it just never was. I'll just say it like that for sure. Are there any other questions that anybody has for Jean or for Adam? Watch that film. Yes, Jean. Okay. Cool. Nobody?
I just wanted to point out that I put in the link in chat, the link to a site that's from Canada. Mm-hmm. You can put in your zip code or the name of your city, and it will pull up what territories, who your land belongs to, and what languages were spoken in where you are. And you can also just look at the map. You can just explore the map. It's not perfectly accurate, but it's the best thing I found so far. I don't, if anyone something better.
That's pretty much the go-to site, and you can also contribute if anyone here has information. There are ways to contribute to that site getting better. We do have a couple. I don't have all the names off the top of my head, but we do have a few federally and state recognized, and a couple of state recognized tribes in Texas.
I opened that site up when you put it up, Shireen, and I put my address in, and it came up Jumanos. Jumanos and Tonkawa tribes. Wow. I have a question for you, Adam. This is Adam, do you have any feelings about PBS spotlighting your film, considering their role as a government entity? Sean.
Thank you, Sean.
He's one of mine.
Thank you. Not so much. I mean, they do get a lot of government funding, but they're independent editorially, so that helps. But even so, the reality is they have a platform that allowed us to reach many millions of people, and so I think it's worthwhile. And I know there's plenty of loathing inside the government towards PBS. So yeah, and the other thing I wanted to mention about the native land site, it's a great place to start, and then hopefully try to learn more about the people of the place where you are, where you're from. And I forgot to mention this in the land acknowledgement at the beginning. that land acknowledgements alone are insufficient. If we're not giving the land back, I saw a lovely example of this where somebody was kind of joking, but a great explanation of it. A guy saying, I went into my landlord's office and gave a rent acknowledgement, and then I left without paying rent.
Nice.
When we do those land acknowledgements are not nothing, but they're just a starting point.
Nice. Wow. Well, that's a good note to end on for us to think about all of these things into, like you said, Adam, now that we know, what do we do next? What actions do we take? So, Jean, Adam, thank you so much for being with us tonight and just, educating us on about all of these things. I certainly will do more reading and gain more of an understanding about all of this. So thank you all again so much. And thank you, Adam, you and your partners for that film, for Dawnland. I certainly will be telling others about it and passing the word on for sure. Shireen, would you like to close us out?
I'm just grateful to everybody who came, including all of our participants. Really appreciate you spending this time with us and watching this film that's not, like a rom-com or anything. Probably watched it around Thanksgiving, around Valentine's Day, but it's really important piece of our, I can't even say history, it's like still going on. And to hear from our discussants was perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Jean, thank you for also bringing this film to our attention as well too, and for giving us to think about it. I had no idea, so I've just been educated all over the place.
So thankful for ACC's support, as I said in the beginning. I'm surrounded by amazing colleagues, many of whom are in this room, and it's an honor to just be able to say, hey, can we show this? And have everyone say, absolutely, let's make it happen. So thank you all. And Adam, thank you for your time and enthusiasm to join us today.
And Layla, thank you. And Layla, thank you for putting up with all our emails and everything. You're just so great. You really are. You really, really are. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. I love getting to be a part of making stuff like this happen. So yeah. And on that note, I guess I'm going to stop the recording and wish everyone a good night.
Thank you all so much.
Everybody.